Okay, so now we can finally get to the piece that everyone actually knows President Clinton for, the Monica Lewinsky scandal. So Bill and Hillary Clinton had been under investigation for something called the Whitewater scandal, which was a separate thing back when they were doing some corrupt and illegal stuff in Arkansas. It included illegal loans and illegal campaign contributions. So this guy you see down here at the bottom, Kenneth Starr, he had been investigating this into sort of all abuses of the Clinton family and their abuse of power and things like that. And this was while Bill was president. So he was sort of looking into a lot of things. It started with the Whitewater scandal. So when he started going into this, he started finding out that Bill had been illegally misusing FBI files, that he had fired some White House travel agents with no cause. That led to believe that he had sort of been trying to cover up his travel arrangements. And then he eventually discovered that Bill had been involved in previous sexual harassment lawsuits from Arkansas government employees, including one woman named Paula Jones. So he started talking to Paula Jones and sort of found what Bill Clinton's sort of MO was and what he liked, and that Paula Jones had not been the first woman that he had sexually harassed that had worked as a subordinate to him in his administration, so it led him to believe that he might still be doing the same thing. So eventually he got in contact with this woman right here, Linda Tripp. And Linda Tripp was a good friend of Monica Lewinsky. Monica Lewinsky was an intern at the White House. And Linda Tripp had been recording her phone calls with Monica Lewinsky. I know, very shady, but she had been recording her phone calls with Monica Lewinsky whenever Monica would talk about her sort of sexual escapades with the president. So Bill Clinton got brought in front of Congress and asked about this, and they're like, what's going on? Who's Monica? What's happening here? And he said, there's nothing going on between myself and Miss Lewinsky. Come to find out, 100% there was. Monica finally admitted that there was. She had actual physical evidence on the so-called blue dress, which I won't get into details about. But basically then it came out that he clearly lied to a congressional hearing, which is perjury. That's illegal. So they brought him back in, and he was like, you lied. And he said, no, I didn't. He said, quote, it depends on what the meaning of the word is. If the meaning is and never has been, that is not. That is one thing. If it means there is none, that was a completely true statement. Now, if someone has asked me on that day, are you having any kind of sexual relations with Miss Lewinsky? That is, asked me a question in the present tense, I would have said no, and it would have been completely true. I know it sounds like gibberish and the most ridiculous statement, and it sort of sounds very Dr. Seussy in the beginning. But what he was trying to say there was that I said there's nothing going on. He meant there is nothing going on. What Congress took it to mean was there was nothing going on. So he was saying, like, oh, you misinterpreted my words. But in reality, he had also in a press conference said, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. And it comes out that he actually did. So the House has to begin impeachment proceedings now because he broke the law. So they are going to charge him with perjury and obstruction of justice. So he'll only be the second president with an impeachment trial ever, if you remember, because Richard Nixon resigned before his trial could take place. The only other one was Andrew Johnson. So over 100 years before this. So in the end, the Senate does find him not guilty, basically on a technicality, but he was found in contempt of court for that lie and given a $90,000 fine, and his law license was revoked because of, improper and corrupt practices. So later on, Bill Clinton did settle out of court with Paula Jones, the woman who had filed a sexual harassment claim against him when he was governor of Arkansas, for $850,000. So because of all of this drama, morality and integrity were really big topics going into the 2000 election. People were saying, yeah, here we are again with a corrupt and nasty politician, so typical, another man using his position to extort power over a female. And so a lot of people were really unhappy with Bill by the time he got out of office. All right, Rodney King. So I alluded to this earlier when we were talking about George Bush's presidency, or his sort of the end of his first term and the election of Bill Clinton. So I'll explain it all now. So the LA riots were some of the largest race, I guess you could call them race riots, to ever happen in history. So police in California and the rest of the United States had been cracking down on gangs and crack cocaine usage as part of the war on drugs. And because of that, tensions between police and urban communities like Los Angeles were really high. So this all gets kicked off with the arrest of this man here, Rodney King. So Rodney King had a long history of drug and alcohol abuse. And this is in March of 1992. They were trying to pull him over for drunk driving, and he wouldn't pull over, and ended up leading police in a high-speed car chase, going over 110 miles an hour. He was being pursued by 4 white police officers. When they finally pulled him over, more officers had arrived. He was pulled from the car, kicked, and beaten with batons. He suffered a facial fracture, a broken right ankle, 11 skull fractures, brain damage, broken teeth, and some kidney damage. Now, what made all of this, headlines was that a man named George Holliday had caught the whole thing on video. So America could actually see what these communities had been claiming had been happening for generations. So millions came out and called for the arrest of these officers, and they were arrested and put on trial for assault and battery and misuse of power. And that verdict came down on April 29th of 1992. All officers were acquitted of all charges. They were found not guilty, and people lost their minds. I mean, it's on video, for Pete's sake. So within a few hours, fires were started, homes and stores were being looted, and people were being attacked. The LA riots will last for 6 days, almost an entire week, and between 55 and 60 people will be killed during all of this. Over 11,000 people will be arrested. Over $1 billion worth of damage will be done to the city. The most famous incident during the LA riots was an attack on a white truck driver named Reginald Denny. Denny had pulled up at a traffic light, and a group of black residents came up to the truck and pulled him out and began to beat him. They were sort of led by this one guy named Damian Williams. And at one point in the attack, Damian Williams hit Denny in the head with a cinder block. He smashed a cinder block over his head. And there had actually been a news crew across the street and broadcast this live on TV as it happened. So that finally the mob dissipated and sort of left Reginald Denny there to die. And 2 other black people who had been watching this on TV separately came out to help Denny. They found him in his truck, semi-conscious, and they drove him to the nearest hospital there in Inglewood. He did have a seizure along the way, leading to more brain damage, but they were able to save him. He has since had years of rehab therapy. He had over 91 skull fractures from the beating. His ability to speak and drive were both permanently impaired. Now, Damian Williams did get the maximum sentence of 10 years for that particular charge, but everyone else basically got away with it. 3 others had been charged but got minor or no sentence at all. Today, though, Damian Williams is still in jail, but actually for a separate charge. He killed someone after he got out of jail on the Reginald Denny assault charge. So a lot of bad comes out of the LA riots. This is really going to not only cause damage to the city at that moment, but a lot of long-term damage. George Bush does sign in a law, or a bill, to provide money for the people whose homes and businesses were damaged from all of this. But once they get the money, are they going to rebuild in the exact same spot? No, because they're afraid that it might happen again. Banks and investment groups are not going to want to construct in those same locations, which is going to lead to sort of the devaluing of that community as a whole. The whole thing didn't even stop until the National Guard finally came out. This is also going to increase tensions between the African American community and the Korean American community in LA. There's a very, very large Korean population in Los Angeles. And since this, because of the damage done to Korean businesses, they have really put a lot of blame on the black community, and there's been a lot of tension even to this day from all of that. Now, What happens to Rodney King? He sues the city and wins a total of $3.8 million plus attorney's fees, most of which he sank into a record label that failed, so that was gone. As for the rest of his life, about a year later, he crashed drunk into a wall. In 1995, he hit his wife with a car. In 2003, he was arrested again for drunk driving. He drove into a house, broke his pelvis. In 2011, on the 20th anniversary of his beating, he was arrested for driving erratically and driving with a suspended license. And then in 2012, he was finally found dead in a pool with traces of alcohol, cocaine, weed, and PCP in his system. So unfortunately for Rodney King, he does not manage to sort of get back up on his feet and make the best of this particular situation. Here are some photos of Los Angeles during the riots. So looting, you see, this is very different from looting and incidences like we see in Hurricane Katrina, where it's like looting to save your family versus looting a Payless. Very different here. All right, so the election of 2000, my personal favorite election ever, just because of the chaos and how sort of interesting it is and how it all plays out. So the Republicans are going to nominate George Herbert Walker Bush's son, George W. Bush, the governor of Texas, and Democrats are going to nominate Bill Clinton's vice president, Al Gore. So a lot of hot topics during the campaign: Social Security, Medicare, healthcare, tax relief. Obviously, like I said, honor and dignity were a big piece of all of this. But the real interesting part of the election comes on election day in one state in particular, being Florida. So Florida has often been pretty split by party. They've got a lot of old liberal Yankees there because of basically Florida as a whole is a retirement community. It's just like one giant retirement community. It's like the whole state of Florida. And they tend to vote Democratic. But there's also a lot of a very large Cuban American and Cuban immigrant population. They tend to vote Republican. They're very religious. So because of this, it's very sort of back and forth Florida. Blue, red, blue, red, blue, red. So as the results begin to be called for Florida, the news says Florida is going to go to Al Gore. That the results are coming in, and it looks like Gore's in the lead. And he's got a significant lead, and he's probably going to win. So congratulations, Al Gore. You've won the state of Florida. About an hour back, they come later, or sorry, an hour later, they come back and they say, just kidding, we have gotten more information. It looks like this is going to go to George Bush. Another hour later, they come back and they're like, just kidding, we have no idea. This is too close to call. So the rest of the states get called, and it's really, there's no majority. What ends up happening is that whoever wins Florida will be put into the majority. It's so close, other than that. And so it all comes down to Florida. Whoever wins Florida wins the election. So ballots are counted different by every county. Some counties have electronic ballots, some have bubble sheets, some have manual punch cards. And that's what a lot of counties were using in Florida. They're called CHADs. So you know how when you get a three-hole punch folder to go in your binder or something, and it's got the holes punched, but the little piece might still be in there, and you have to punch it out. That's sort of what happens here. You're taking a little metal needle thing, and you're punching out the hole that corresponds to the vote, and that's how you vote. And then they put the ballot in a reader, and it reads all the holes. Now, if you're 100 years old and you've got arthritis and you can't see very well, it might be hard to punch that out. You might punch the wrong hole. You might not punch it hard enough, and it might just sort of hang there and get folded back up when it goes to the reader. You might not even punch it at all. You might just dimple it. So what ends up happening is that because the vote is so close, it's going to trigger a recount. And Katherine Harris, the Secretary of State for Florida, says at first, no recount. We're not doing a recount. Now, she's a Republican. She works for George Bush's brother, Jeb Bush. So when she says no recount, a bunch of older people started coming out saying they think they might have accidentally voted for Pat Buchanan when they meant to vote for Al Gore. Even Pat Buchanan went on television, on the news, and said, I think a lot of people voted for me on accident. So Gore sues Bush in Florida state courts for a recount. So Bush countersues in federal courts to stop the recount. So this makes it all the way to the Supreme Court case, Bush v. Gore. The Supreme Court decides in a 5-4 decision, very split, that the entire state needed to be recounted. Unfortunately, the votes had to be certified by a certain date, and Katherine Harris refused to accept them late, so there wasn't going to be enough time to complete the recount. With the little recount they were able to do, Bush became the certified winner, but only by 537 votes. It took us over a month to figure out all of this. So had they continued the recount, Gore probably would have won. But that's not how it all came down. So the way our law works, George Bush became the next president of the United States.